Something that I've been sort of witnessing that I'm not really sure about. So I want to really talk about my thoughts on this issue because, again, like I said, I'm not really sure about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I'm seeing a lot of data scientists and data analysts do this. And on one hand, it's good because it helps them do things really quickly and efficiently. But on the other hand, I feel that it's somehow restricting their growth, but also the growth of the industry. What I'm talking about is how their approach to AI is detrimental actually to their personal growth, but also how their clients develop. Now, I speak to a lot of data analysts and data scientists in my work. I mean, I've got people who work for me who are data analysts and data scientists, and even data engineers. And then obviously I mentor a lot of people, and then I've got a network where people ask me for help and advice. And one of the things that's cropping up more and more now is that when I ask them, "Oh, how did you, build this model, or how did you run this analysis?" More often than not, and I would say most, probably 80% of them, maybe even more actually, will say to me, "Oh, actually, I used ChatGPT or Claude or something similar to help me write the code." So what they're doing is basically typing in the problem, and then they're getting Claude or ChatGPT to generate the Python script or the SQL script. Like I said, I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or bad thing, so I'm just going to sort of talk about it and then let you decide whether you think it's a good thing or bad thing. As I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with using these AI agents to help you write code. I mean, I think, it accelerates your sort of time it takes to write the code so you can do it really much faster. And back in the days when I was an analyst, and I wasn't an analyst for long, but back in the days when I was an analyst, I used to use Google, right? I used to search on Google in forums and other places to find out code. So for example, one example was like, I think I was stuck on a problem where I needed to score a variable above my current variable if it was within the same sort of session or something. And so it was like a lag function. I didn't really know about lag function. I think a lot of you who know me will know that my background is really psychology, not programming or coding. So I wasn't really good at coding, but I used Google and forums to find answers and even ask questions. Back in the day, we had a lot of people who would answer questions if you posted them on forums. So I don't think there's anything wrong with using AI agents to like ChatGPT or Claude to help you generate code. I mean, it just accelerates what I guess we did historically, which was Google, search for that code and for a code and copy and paste it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And actually, it probably helps you be very clear in what you're asking the AI agent. So you need to really understand the question in order for you to prompt the AI agent to get the code that you want. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and I think it's a good practice to have now. You've got these tools, so why wouldn't you use it? But then the question is, why am I having doubts? And I want to give you two recent examples that I've encountered with a couple of people that a couple of data analysts, data scientists that I'm connected with. The first one was she was analyzing retail data. So the business had asked her questions like, who were the most profitable customers? When was the most profitable month? Very simple questions, actually. Questions around, can you work out when is the most profitable time, or the highest sales? When do we have the most highest sales? And that was really because the business wanted to know that they were going to do some maintenance work on their website, and they needed to shut down their infrastructure. So they wanted to make sure that they weren't doing it at the highest sales time. And so she was asked to run a whole series of analysis to answer a lot of these questions because the business needed to do something. And and so she basically, she was quite junior, so she went to a chat GPT, I believe, and she prompted it and got the code, and she got the answers. Okay, so which was fine. And then I sort of asked her, I said to her, okay, how do you know that these answers are correct? And then I asked questions like, have you validated those answers? And then I asked questions like, how do you know that the code you've written is doing what you think it's doing? And then I'm going to go to my second example now before I answer those questions, or tell you what I found when I asked those questions. So I had another analyst, and he was analyzing the sort of feedback from customers, and he was asked to basically create a sentiment analysis, but a bit more advanced sentiment analysis. It wasn't just sentiment, they needed a scoring algorithm on top of the feedback to say, how the business was doing. It was one of the KPIs. One of the KPIs the business had was customer feedback. How positive was it? So it wasn't just enough to say it's positive, negative. If it was positive, how positive it was, and if it was negative, how negative it was. So he clearly went to, I think, ChatGPT as well, and asked, or prompted it to come up with code to score customer feedback, and he got the code back again. Okay. The business then asked him, "That's great. Can you explain what that code is doing?" And that's where he was stuck, because he'd literally just generated the code and didn't really understand what the code was doing. And so I asked him, when you did prompt it, how do you know that the code is doing what you thought it was doing if you don't know what the code is doing? How do you know what parts of the code are doing which components of your analysis? And so we had all these questions that were open that they couldn't answer, which, this is where the bit I'm worried about, because what's happened is that they're running models or they're running analysis in Python or SQL without really understanding what it is that they're doing. And the reason I'm concerned for that in terms of their growth is that they're not really understanding the business question that they're meant to be answering. They're answering the question because it's a task, rather than answering the question to understand more about the business, more understand, or also to learn from it. So that's what concerned me, and I felt that that would also then hamper how their clients develop, because a lot of the time, if you truly understand the business question, you come up with sort of new ways or innovative ways of answering the question, not the traditional ways. And a lot of the time when you prompt a ChatGPT or Claude or Anthropic or Perplexity, you get sort of standard answers or standard code that it's learnt off from the myriad of sources that it's been having access to. So I sort of asked them, well, so that worried me, that the client would never get anything new. It would just get a regurgitation of what's happened in the past. And this is actually something I saw about 10 years ago, when we had a lot of people coming into data analytics, or mainly data science, where they could run machine learning models or statistical models just because they knew coding. So they knew that if they pulled in this Python package, they could run a random forest. But they didn't know what the random forest did and why it gave the answer it gave, or also more importantly, whether it was the right technique or machine learning technique to use on that data or to use for that business problem. They just knew that they could run a predictive model using machine learning, and the only machine learning algorithm they knew was random forest, and so they ran it. Okay. Or a lot of people were just running classification. They wanted to group people, and they'd run k-means, or they'd run nearest neighbor, because that's the one they were taught in their boot camp or on their Coursera course or at university, and that's the one they used. They didn't actually know what they were running, and they felt they didn't have to, because the business wanted a clustering algorithm or they wanted a predictive model, and they were running that and they were building those models, and great, and the business could use them. They probably weren't so concerned back in those days about ROI of those models, because back then it was just a case of, can we utilize our data and build these really great and cool models. So going back to the use of AI agents, and especially the large language models like ChatGPT, that did concern me, that they were generating code, the foundation of translating the business question into a language or a way of querying the data, and they didn't understand that. So that did concern me. And like I said, also that they will end up just running things the same all the time, irrespective of the business question. Obviously, if the business just wants an output and no one's going to check it, then that's fine, right? You just generate the code, run it. Maybe you need to tweak it a bit because there's certain things that ChatGPT hasn't thought about, and you just generate the output and you give the output. And so it does the task, right? So it does the task in terms of it generates the output. But is it generating the right output? And that was like the core question I had to both of these data analysts and data scientists. The other thing I said, have you validated your findings? And that was something I don't think is a new phenomenon. It's not that AI is here now and people are stopping validating their findings. I think I've seen this throughout, and it's actually quite fundamental to being in data, that you have to validate your findings. So for example, let's say you ran a few queries and you were looking at the average basket size, or you're looking at how ROI, how profitable, or what the ROI is on a marketing campaign or some other activity. You'd want to validate that what you have run in the code, irrespective of whether AI does it or you do it, is accurate. And one of the ways to do that is just eye the data. Okay, so let's say we ran something. Let's say I want the maximum value in a transaction in this year. So 2025 to date, I want to know what the highest value transaction was. Now, you might think that's quite easy. You just go, max on the data set. But sometimes there are errors. Like, for example, you might have imported the data incorrectly. You might not have imported all of it. You might have missed out half the data set, or you might have missed out 10% of the data set, or you might have only imported 10% of the data set. How do you know you've done that? You need to validate that the whole data set's been imported. So you'd run a count on how many cases there were, because you should know how big your data set is. And even if you don't know how big your data set is, if you work in that business, you should have an idea. We do about 1,000 transactions a day, so therefore across 200 days I should get 200,000 transactions. Okay, my data set is saying I've got 50,000. That should clearly ring alarm bells. So you need to validate your finding that you've got the whole data set. And then going back to that example of have you got the maximum, you should have an idea. Like, if your business sells, I don't know, sweets or whatever, no one's going to spend £100 on sweet. Well, I hope not. But a sweet item wouldn't cost £100. But if you're in the gifting business or the luxury goods business, then yeah, you've probably got items that are in the tens of thousands. So if you know your business, you'd know what the maximum and minimum value should be. I mean, I had one analyst who ran some analysis, and they'd included values of minus. Okay. So what happens is, there in the transaction file, I think it was minus 99p or 99 cents. And what that actually was a proxy for selling things like carry bags and boxes and other things that you'd carry your product in that you wouldn't sell to a customer, but you needed to log it in your POS system so that you knew you had to order more. Because if you run out of carry bags, how do you know? The only way to know is that you run out of carry bags, you order it. But if you could automate that through the POS system, by the time you scan a carry bag, it does a minus number. Now, obviously, a lot of these stuff, carry bags and stuff, are paid for, so you get the positive. But when this analyst did this example, he was including the minus 99s, and he was saying, oh, this is the average value of this. We've got loads of products that are minus 99p or 99 cents. And I said to him, do you think the business gives away stuff or gives away money for minus 99p? And he didn't know. And I said, this is where you need to validate your findings. You need to understand all the data and understand that what you are seeing, is it true of your business? Then the other thing that worried me was that the data analysts and data scientists couldn't explain their code. Like I said, I'm not from a coding background, but I can read code and I know exactly what it does. I can go through, my analyst code, and I can pretty much know what each line of code does. And that is quite fundamental, because you're using a language, and if you have no idea what that does, then isn't that worrying? It's like, let's say you're speaking a foreign language, but you don't know what the words mean. That, you could be saying anything. So I think that concerned me more than I think anything else, that they didn't know what each line of code was doing. Because if you don't know what each line of code is doing and you're running it, then how do you know you're getting the right answer? And that goes back to my earlier example of when people were running machine learning algorithms. They were just running lines in Python and producing a predictive model, but they had no idea what it was doing or how it came about. And some of them actually couldn't even explain the findings from a predictive model because they didn't know what they were doing in the first place. Looping back, so that's what concerns me, the approach that data analysts and data scientists are taking in using AI. I think it's going to hinder their growth. I think, you're going to get to a point where the questions you get asked aren't simple enough for you to prompt an AI to give you the answer. Sometimes you get asked questions that are new, that require you to think through the problem and be creative in your problem solving. And so therefore, if people aren't doing that early in their career, when they get to the stage where they ask those complex questions, where is the learning window? When do they get to do that learning? Because you can't learn at that point. You're in that role. The company expects you to answer those questions. So I think that's quite key, that everything I've discussed, that people still have to think about things critically, have to think about things in terms of problem solving, especially when you come across new problems. But also, even if you come across existing problems, you don't want to solve them the way they've always been solved, because if you want to give your company an edge, you want to solve them in a novel way. I mean, we are, my company's building an algorithm to create audiences for publishers that is new and unique, that nobody else produces, that nobody else has access to either. And that gives them a distinct advantage. Now, to create that algorithm, we it's taken us years of actually designing it and now building it. If we just went to ChatGPT and said, create us audiences, it would just use the method that's already being used. So I think, if you're new to data science and data analytics, It's great to use ChatGPT and Claude and all the others, but you really need to also understand what question you're trying to answer and how you go about answering it. And then the other thing, obviously, is that you should know the code. I mean, like I said, I used to Google code, but I actually knew what it did. So I may not have known like the lag function, but once I knew what lag meant and how it could be used in code, lag -1, I still remember the thing. You know, I knew how it did, and then I would actually test it on a sample of data. So rather than do it on the whole data set, you know, when I had millions of rows. I mean, I was working on big data way before big data became a thing, and so we had like millions and millions of rows. I wouldn't run it on all of those. I'd run it on like a sample of 100 just to see if it works, see if my algorithm works. Maybe that's something you should do. You should probably take a sample of that data so that you can eye it, run your code, understand what it does, run it line at a time, see what it does on your data, and then hopefully that helps you learn what the code is doing. Because I think it's very important that as a data analyst or a data scientist, you know what your Python or SQL code is doing. In summary, I'm not saying don't use AI, because like I said, you know, it's just another tool, and as a data analyst and data scientist or even a data engineer, it can be great. It can help you generate code that you know, would have taken you a long time to do. It just accelerates that process. But what I would say to you is that you still need to think about the fundamentals. The approach you take can't ignore things like checking for accuracy, validating the data, understanding the code, and also knowing that the output that you're giving is the right output. You know, like I said, I'm not saying don't use AI. I mean, I would actually say use AI. So I leave that to you to decide how much AI you want to use. Because if you let AI do everything, at some point, what is your unique advantage? What is it that you have that other data analysts don't have or data scientists don't have? So at some point, you've got to decide how you stand out in the marketplace, how you're different from the other data analysts and data scientists that are applying for the jobs that you're applying for. And I think one of the ways to do that is not to rely wholly on AI. Use AI as a tool. It's brilliant. It's a great co-pilot, great augmentation to your role. But also don't forget the fundamentals.